What is up, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the 3&D. We had a week off. Now we're fresh and back for a brand new episode, 1 week into free agency. Here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. On tonight's episode, we recap all of the madness throughout the first week of free agency. And talk about which teams have improved the most, some of the notable moves, and also stay tuned later for a recap on Victor Wembanyama's Summer League debut, as well as the Damian Lillard drama, and a look at the Washington Wizards, who, in my opinion, have been one of the most active teams throughout free agency and have one of the more interesting developing rosters throughout it. So I hope everybody's been doing well. Last week we were off due to the 4th of July, but we're back this week, 1 week into free agency, and plenty has gone down. It's been honestly pretty crazy throughout the past couple of weeks. We haven't seen the big trade happen yet. The Damian Lillard trade is on the horizon. We haven't seen that go down yet, but a bunch of interesting moves have occurred. But first things first, Summer League tipped off, and all anybody could talk about was the debut of Victor Wembanyama in the Spurs versus Charlotte Hornets game that took place last night, or it took place on Friday nights. That was by far the most anticipated Summer League game so far, and probably on the entire calendar, as each team plays about 4 games. Wembanyama originally said that he was not going to play in the Summer League, mainly due to the amount he's been playing over the past year. He was playing for the Metropolitan 92 in the French League. He's been playing in the FIBA League. He plans on playing in the Olympics next summer, so he was going to take some time off to kind of get prepared for the NBA season, for his first NBA season. But he decided to play. He's probably only going to play in 2 games. It was on a minutes restriction, but Friday night, the Spurs took down the Hornets 76-68 in both of the teams' first Summer League games. And on top of Wembanyama's debut, we also had Brandon Miller's debut. Brandon Miller played 31 minutes and scored 16 points, grabbed 11 rebounds, was 5 for 15 from the field, and was 3 for 10 from 3. So he had a decent game, a little bit inconsistent scoring from the field, but that was kind of his MO while he was at Alabama. That's what a lot of people kind of were questioning was going to be his consistency, especially right out of the gate. But hit a few threes. Wembanyama actually guarded him for a decent amount of time. Watching that game was pretty interesting. But a couple of other Charlotte Hornets that had good games. Bryson Gowans, who's a second-year shooting guard, had 15 points, and James Bouknight, who is also a second-year shooting guard, had 14 points and 9 rebounds. So the Hornets played well. Spurs ended up coming out on top. And as everybody was kind of watching out for, Victor Wembanyama played 27 minutes, which was actually a lot more than most people thought he was going to play. He only scored 9 points, grabbed 8 rebounds, and he shot 2 for 13 from the field and only 1 for 6 from 3. But on top of that, he did block 5 shots, and he had 3 assists and a bunch of notable nice passes if you watched the game that didn't go down as assists, but a couple of heads-up plays. Obviously not the stat line that a lot of people were expecting with the hype around Wembanyama and all of that. But to be fair, it's his first Summer League game. And again, you can't go too into depth about the Summer League. You see players year after year play amazing in the Summer League games. You get excited for the rookie year and they don't do anything. Or they play terrible in the Summer League and then the season starts and they become one of the better rookies throughout the league. It happens all the time. So again, you cannot read too much into it, but of course, everybody wants to see Wembanyama play. The first time anybody saw him playing in the Spurs jersey, and it was interesting. He definitely looked a little bit awkward out there. Watching the entirety of that game, he seemed a little bit awkward. Didn't completely know what he was doing. Kind of looked And in his interview after the game, he did admit that he kind of didn't know what he was doing out there. He was just trying to get his legs from under him, and it looked like that. It looked like he was a little bit lost, didn't know the ins and the outs of the offense and, kind of like running the show. So that was interesting. And that's partly the reason why he didn't have such a good game. But again, his shooting from the field wasn't great, but he did grab 8 rebounds. He had 5 blocks, including blocking a 3 from Brandon Miller, which was a great closeout defensive play that he was down in the paint and then ran up and was able to block it. So, there was some good and there was some bad in Wembanyama's debut, but obviously is the most hyped debut since LeBron James 20 years ago, back in 2003. So it was definitely interesting. He'll probably play in one more summer league game, I would think, probably their next one. And then he might be on a restricted limits. He might be on a limit restriction too. It might not get as many minutes as they would want, but I mean, he played 27 minutes this game. He probably doesn't play that in the next game, and then he'll probably sit out for the rest of it. And we'll have to wait until the preseason in October to watch Victor play again. But again, not too much of a terrible game. The one player though that I was completely and kind of strangely impressed with was Julian Champagnie. He just signed a 4-year, $12 million extension with the Spurs, which all 4 years, I believe, are all guaranteed too. Usually you see those kind of contracts with, guys who went undrafted and it's like maybe 1 year guaranteed and the next 3 years are non-guaranteed or 2 and 2. All 4 years are guaranteed for Champagnie. So he'll be getting paid $3 million a year for the next few years. And after going undrafted in last year's draft and bouncing around from a couple of teams and being on a 2-way with the Spurs last year, it was pretty impressive that they gave him a roster spot. They did the same thing for Sandro Mamukelashvili, who was on the Bucks 2-way, and they got rid of him during the season. The Spurs brought him in. But he had a great game, and obviously I'm well aware of Champagnie as he was a St. John's Red Storm player for 3 years and then came out his junior year. He had 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists. He was 7 of 15 from the field and 4 for 10 from 3. So all around had a very, very solid game. He looked like the best player on the court by far during this game. I mean, Brandon Miller ended up having a pretty solid game, but he led every team in scoring. He was the only guy who broke 20 points. I mean, it was a 76-68 final, so you can understand why there was only one guy that scored 20 points, but I was really impressed by him. And I thought the Spurs are going to be an interesting team. I mean, obviously with Wembanyama, being their star and the player that everybody's going to be trying to watch. They have a few other interesting young pieces that I'm very intrigued to see how they do this year. Champagnie being one of them, Mamu being another one. Trey Jones. Trey Jones got traded, but a few other guys. Dominic Barlow's another one who was ended up added on a 2-way contract, and seemed pretty interesting. So Wembanyama's debut. Back to the fact, Wembanyama's debut was a little bit underwhelming. Nobody would have been satisfied unless he dropped 30 points and 17 rebounds and lit it up from 3. They'd be talking about that all day on ESPN if that was the case. But 9 points, 8 rebounds is not terrible for his first game in NBA action too. It's a big difference between the league he played in previously and the NBA too. So he's got to get his legs underneath him and get a little bit of a better feel for the NBA life. So that was the little summer league. We're not really going too much into summer league, not too much going on. Obviously, free agency kicked off a week ago, and one of the big headlines is Damian Lillard requested a trade. So the day has finally come that we have heard from Damian Lillard, and he wants out of Portland after years and years and years of saying he wants to only play for Portland, and he only wants to win if it's in Portland. He's finally caved, and he is finally demanding a trade, and primarily he's demanding a trade to the Miami Heat. Now, there's a few teams, there's a bunch of teams that are very interested in him. One of them being the Utah Jazz, who actually are ready to trade a lot for him, which kind of confuses me a little bit because if they were to add Lillard to their team, they don't they aren't much better than Portland is right now. So that's like a little bit of a confusing one. But the Celtics are another one that are looking at him. The Knicks, of course, are popping up in some trade scenarios, but the Miami Heat is apparently the team he wants to go to, demands to go to, and will only play for. His agent has come out and said that it would be franchise suicide for any other team to trade for him because he would not be happy, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, especially from a guy that went from being all in on one franchise, loyal to one franchise. Now he's demanding to only play for one team after signing a huge contract too. He signed that big extension that he's going to have a couple of years left. He's getting paid well over 50 mil for the next couple of years. So he signed an insane contract that is going to be tough for teams to bring on. We're looking at a massive trade that's going to go down if he even gets traded. I would think he probably does because he doesn't want to start the season with Portland, but he's demanding his way to Miami. And the rumor that came out is the Trailblazers are demanding 2 veteran players and at least 3 first-round picks in exchange for Damian Lillard. There's very few teams that can offer up that, and at least 3 first-round picks is honestly kind of generous compared to the amount of first-round picks that other teams have been giving away. Rudy Gobert, for example, Utah ended up getting 5 first-round picks from Minnesota in order to trade him, but they're demanding at least 3 first-round picks and 2 veteran players, which basically means it'll have to be a 3-team trade. There's no teams that'll be able to give up all of that and stay under the luxury tax or under the salary cap and be able to make that trade go through. So a 3-team trade is pretty much a definite if Portland is going to get back that much stuff. There's a few different scenarios that could go down, but a lot of teams are talking about the Brooklyn Nets being involved. A lot of teams are talking about a bunch of teams being involved, possibly the Chicago Bulls because they're trying to shop Zach LaVine. Anybody who's trying to shop like a big name player. Miami is also saying that they're insistent on keeping Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Hero. In order for this kind of trade to go down, you would definitely think that at least one of those guys has to get traded. Somebody's going to demand a Tyler Hero, most likely Tyler Hero, because Adebayo and Butler, I think, are the 2 key faces of the team. They would like to keep those guys. I think I really only can see this trade getting done if Tyler Hero is involved with the trade. And that being the case, I cooked up a little bit of a 3-team trade, threw it through the NBA trade machine that everybody loves to do just to check if it's possible to go through, check the salary cap and everything. And this is a trade that can go through and keeps every team pretty solid under the salary cap. This specific trade will keep the Heat minus 2.9 mil in salary. You'll keep the Blazers minus 1.8 mil, and the Nets will only be taking on plus 4.8 mil. So relatively every team kind of gets back to the point that they're at right now in the salary cap. They don't move too significantly up or down with this trade, but I think it's very interesting, and I think it could possibly happen. There's a lot of things that have to give away for this to happen, but breaking it down, here's what each team would receive. It's a 3-team trade between the Brooklyn Nets, the Portland Trailblazers, and the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat would receive Damian Lillard, who's got 4 years left at 46.5 mil average on his contract per year. And they would also receive Dorian Finney-Smith from the Brooklyn Nets. Solid 3-and-D kind of guy, more of a defensive-minded player, can slot him in to possibly be the starting small forward in this kind of situation. Damian Lillard becomes starting point guard, and Jimmy Butler kind of starts alongside those two guys. So they get Damian Lillard from Portland, Dorian Finney-Smith from Brooklyn, and then the Portland Trailblazers receive back Ben Simmons from the Brooklyn Nets, who's got 2 years, $37.8 million per year left on his contract. Jaime Jaquez, who they just drafted in the first round this year, great scorer out of UCLA. They drafted him in the 20s in this year's draft. He just signed his rookie deal, which will be 4 years for about $3.5 million per year. Nikola Jovic, who they drafted in the first round last year, will also be headed to Portland for 3 years, $2.3 million per year, and 3 first-round picks. So 2 of them coming from Miami, a 2027 first-round pick from Miami, and a 2029 first-round pick from Miami, as well as a 2028 first-round pick from Brooklyn. So Brooklyn throws a first-round pick in there. And to recap it, the Blazers only lose Damian Lillard, and they bring in Ben Simmons, Jaquez, Jovic, and 3 first-round picks. So they get 2 young guys who are both late first-round picks to kind of try to build the team around, see if one of those guys can become like a piece to build around. And they take on Ben Simmons' contract, which is a terrible contract. He's getting paid $37.8 million per year for the next 2 years, but he showed a lot of promise in the beginning of his career. And if Portland were to get rid of Damian Lillard, it's worth a shot to bring in Ben Simmons and see if he, can be a player that you can keep around and possibly re-sign and can get back to his great defensive form that he used to be. I mean, he's gone through a lot of mental issues and injury issues throughout the last couple of years in Philadelphia and Brooklyn. And Brooklyn's trying to get rid of him too. They took on that terrible contract, so they might do whatever they can to get rid of him. And then the Brooklyn Nets receive Kyle Lowry from Miami, who has 1 year left, $29.6 million per year, and Tyler Hero is the big acquisition that they get, who's got 4 years left on his extension that he just signed last offseason with Miami at $27 million per year. So Brooklyn basically trades a few pieces and a first-round pick in order to bring in an expiring veteran contract in Kyle Lowry that could help the team for one season, and Tyler Hero, which will be a piece that you can line up beside Michael Bridges and Cam Johnson as the 3 guys to build around for the franchise. I think that it's a pretty decent trade. So recapping it, I think everybody kind of gets what they want. The Miami Heat get Damian Lillard. They also get Dorian Finney-Smith, who's under contract for 3 years. And it's a rotational kind of guy. You can bring him off the bench. You can start him at forward. He's a good defensive player. And I think he's a good complement to the scoring power that they have with Butler and Damian Lillard and Adebayo. And so they bring in Lillard and Finney-Smith, and they lose 2 first-round picks. They're young guys, Jaquez and Nikola Jovic, one of their key pieces in Tyler Hero, and an expiring veteran contract after this season, Kyle Lowry. In my opinion, that's like the minimum they're probably going to have to give up. I only have them giving up 2 first-round picks and Tyler Hero mainly, and 2 young players. In order to get Lillard, there's a good chance that they might have to give up even more than that. I mean, Lillard's under contract for the next 4 years. He's a superstar, and you could legitimately win an NBA championship if you bring him in and pair him with Butler and Adebayo. That's a dangerous team. So I only have them losing 2 first-round picks, and then in exchange, Portland only loses Damian Lillard. They don't lose anything else. They give up their star player, and they bring in Ben Simmons, who is under contract for another 2 years. They bring in Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic, who are 2 young guys, and they bring in 3 first-round picks that are 3 consecutive years, 2027, 28, and 29. Miami being the 27 and 29 first-round pick, which if all goes correctly for Portland and Miami kind of fizzles out towards the end of Lillard's contract, those could end up being really good picks. The Miami Heat might be deep in a rebuild by the end of the 2020s and could end up being high lottery picks for Portland. And same with the Brooklyn Nets. You never know. The 2028 first round pick for the Brooklyn Nets. And then obviously the Nets bring in Tyler Hero, who could legitimately become their franchise cornerstone, and Kyle Lowry, who's a decent veteran to hold on to for a year. He's getting paid a lot of money, but you can afford to bring that on if you get rid of Ben Simmons' contract. And all they lose is Ben Simmons, who they're trying to get rid of anyway, Dorian Finney-Smith, who's a solid veteran that they brought in via trade, and 1 first-round pick. So that's the recap of the 3-team trade that I kind of cooked up, and the salary cap works. The only thing that will make this contract fail if you try to put it into the NBA trade machine right now is the fact that Jaime Jaquez can't be traded until July 31st because he was just drafted. So for this trade to happen, it would have to happen in August. It looks like nothing's even going to happen anytime soon anyway, but Jaquez can't be traded until July 31st since he was just drafted. They could agree to something, but it wouldn't be able to become official until August 1st. So that's the trade scenario that I came up with, and I think it's pretty fair. I think all 3 teams in the mix get essentially what they need. The Brooklyn Nets are trying to navigate through the post KD and Kyrie era. They already have a couple of good pieces, and adding Tyler Hero to that could be really good. If all they have to give up is pretty much Simmons and a first-round pick, I think they would love to do that. They'd love to get rid of Simmons' contract. Portland would get a plethora of young talent in Jovic and Jaquez, and they would get 3 first-round picks that could all end up being really high first-round picks too at the end of the 2020s, which could help them build to be a sustainably good team if they, tank for the next couple of seasons. And then Miami gets what they want in Damian Lillard. And they also get a nice role player in Dorian Finney-Smith. And all they have to do is give up 2 firsts and Tyler Hero mainly, and 2 of their young talents. So I think that this trade could go down. But again, if Lillard does want to go to Miami, it's most likely going to be a 3-team trade. I mean, realistically, wherever he goes, it's probably going to have to be a 3-team trade because nobody's going to be able to give up. Nobody who's in the running for Lillard is going to be able to give up 4+ first-round picks by themselves. It's going to have to come from multiple different places. So that's an interesting Damian Lillard trade scenario. We'll be talking about this plenty. As long as he doesn't get traded within the next week or so, this is going to probably be the talk of the summer on this show, is all the possible scenarios for the Damian Lillard trade, and it's going to be interesting to see how everything goes down. So jumping from there, we're going to check out some of the free agency that has gone down in the NBA over the past week. Obviously, on June 30th at 6:00 p.m., NBA free agency opened up, and just like it always does, there was a ton of moves made the second that free agency opened up. Nothing can become official until July 6th. So all these moves have just recently became official, but you can verbally agree to things starting June 30th at 6:00. It used to be July 1st at midnight. So you used to, anybody who lives on the East Coast used to go to sleep, and you wake up in the morning and you'd have like 10, 11 Woj notifications for a bunch of free agent signings. But now they're starting at 6:00. So everybody was able to, kind of be active and see stuff go down. But a bunch of things, a bunch of teams have made a ton of different moves. We saw the Washington Wizards make a ton. We'll talk about the Wizards up next on the show, but we saw a bunch of teams make some interesting moves. The Boston Celtics being one of them. They signed O'Shea Brissett and Delano Banton, who are 2 bench guys, but bringing Kristaps Porzingis, and they agreed to a 2-year, $60 million extension with him too. So he's on a contract now for the next 3 years. The Brooklyn Nets were able to bring back their guy Cam Johnson at 4 years for $108 million. They also brought in a couple of veterans with Dennis Smith Jr. and Lonnie Walker, both on 1-year deals. They lost a few pieces, though. They lost a few shooters. They lost Seth Curry, who signed with the Dallas Mavericks. Joe Harris was traded to the Detroit Pistons, and Yuta Watanabe signed with the Phoenix Suns. The Charlotte Hornets also extended their star player, LaMelo Ball, to a 5-year, $260 million contract. Had a lot of money for a guy who now had 1 All-Star season and was injured almost all of last year, but Charlotte's all in on him. He's the face of their franchise. They're also bringing Miles Bridges back too, who sat out this entire year after a domestic violence issue, and refusal to sign the qualifying offer that the Hornets gave him last offseason because he was a restricted free agent. He signed it now, so he'll be under contract for 1 year at $7.9 million. Then will become an unrestricted free agent next offseason. But of course, they've got 3 rookies coming in: Brandon Miller, Nick Smith Jr., and Amari Bailey, who all 3 of them could be impactful players from the second that they take the court. The Chicago Bulls made a couple of big re-signings. Nikola Vucevic was re-signed for 3 years, $60 million, and Kobe White was also re-signed for 3 years, $40 million. There's a bunch of teams that were wondering what Kobe White was going to do. He's a restricted free agent, and they've got a bunch of guards with Zach LaVine and Ayo Dosunmu too, who's also a restricted free agent, hasn't signed with anybody yet. They also signed Javon Carter to a 3-year, $20 million deal, and Torrey Craig to a 2-year deal. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers made a couple of good depth moves. Max Strus, they agreed to a sign and trade with for 4 years and $63 million. Karis LeVert, they signed to a 2-year. They were able to re-sign to a 2-year deal. George Niang, they signed to a 3-year deal to come off their bench. Ty Jerome, they also signed to a 2-year deal at $2.3 million per year. So that was a very good, very high rewarding move. They lost a few pieces though in the Max Strus trade, since they did a sign trade. Shetty Osman and Lamar Stevens are both headed to Miami in exchange for Max Strus, but Strus has become one of the better shooters in the NBA. He was a starter all year for the Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat, and I think it's a pretty good move. It gives them some depth, especially off the bench too. Not necessarily sure if he'll start, obviously with Garland and Donovan Mitchell being the backcourt for Cleveland. There isn't much room for him to start, but he'll probably be one of the top guys off the bench for Cleveland, and with a nice 4-year deal. So he ended up getting paid, which was very solid. And then, of course, the Dallas Mavericks too made a few moves. They re-signed Kyrie Irving to a 3-year, $126 million deal. Everybody was wondering what kind of contract that Kyrie was going to get. He ended up getting $42 million a year. So it ended up working out well for him. Dallas brought him back. So him and Luka will run Dallas for another 3 years, or until Kyrie demands his way out of Dallas, which could be another inevitable situation. They also re-signed Dwight Powell. They brought in Seth Curry on a 2-year deal. And in a signing trade, they brought in Grant Williams, who was with the Boston Celtics for a 4-year, $53 million deal. The Denver Nuggets, the NBA champion Denver Nuggets, re-signed a couple of guys. Reggie Jackson, they brought back for a 2-year deal. DeAndre Jordan, they brought back for a 1-year deal. Brought in Justin Holiday for a 1-year deal. And then they drafted Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, and Hunter Tyson, who are all Strawther was 29th pick, but the other 2 were second-round picks. The Detroit Pistons, too, haven't really lost anybody. They only lost Corey Joseph. They brought in Monte Morris and Joe Harris via trades, which are 2 very solid veterans for the rebuilding team. And Asar Thompson, they drafted with the 5th pick, and Marcus Sasser. And you add that to Cade Cunningham and all the rest of those guys. Very, very interesting moves. Then the Houston Rockets are another team that's, that's improved big time. We'll talk about them in a few. But the Indiana Pacers also agreed to a big extension with Tyrese Halliburton at a 5-year, $260, the same deal that LaMelo Ball got. Obi Toppin they also received from the Knicks in exchange for 2 second-round picks. A few other interesting moves too. The Clippers re-signed Russell Westbrook to a 2-year deal for only $7.8 million. So he took a lot less money than a lot of people expected he was going to try to compete with the Clippers. Mason Plumlee was also re-signed. The Grizzlies were able to extend Desmond Bane to a 5-year, $207 million contract. They also brought in Derrick Rose, who played at the University of Memphis, and will return to Memphis to be Ja's veteran looking out for him pretty much. And I think that there's no one better than Derrick Rose to be able to do that. You're also bringing in Marcus Smart too, who's a hard-nosed guy who I think will get on Ja's case when he comes back from suspension if he does anything crazy. The Heat added a few guys for their bench. Kevin Love they re-signed to a 2-year deal. Josh Richardson they brought back. He was in New Orleans this past year. Thomas Bryant, Orlando Robinson they also brought in. The Bucks were able to re-sign Chris Middleton. He opted out of his contract. He got a fresh 3-year contract for $34 million a year. Brook Lopez, they also were able to re-sign. They brought in Malik Beasley, too, to the veteran minimum at 2.7, which was kind of interesting. I thought he was going to get a multi-year deal, but he ended up settling for the minimum with the Bucks and will become a free agent again next year. The Timberwolves were able to extend Anthony Edwards, who they're trying to build around. There's a lot of rumors going around if they are going to shop Karl Anthony Towns and try to get something for him. That'll be interesting to see. They also added a couple of veterans, Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. They extended Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So they have a decent team looking out. The Pelicans extended Herbert Jones to a 4-year deal. He was a restricted free agent. The Knicks were able to bring in Dante DiVincenzo, which was a piece that they kind of needed. The Oklahoma City Thunder were able to bring in Victor Oladipo, Davis Bertans, and Patty Mills via trades. And the Orlando Magic brought in the vet Joe Ingles and was able to re-sign Mo Wagner as well. The Sixers brought in Patrick Beverley. The Suns brought in a plethora of guys. We're going to go over them in a few. Trailblazers were able to extend Jeremy Grant and Matisse Thybulle. They also extended to. Thybulle was a restricted free agent and signed an offer sheet from the Dallas Mavericks for 3 years, $33 million. The Trailblazers matched that, so he'll be returning to the Trailblazers for 3 years and $33 million. Obviously, Scoot Henderson is set to come in and will probably become their franchise cornerstone now with Damian Lillard set to leave. Domantas Sabonis was extended on a 5-year deal for the Kings. They also brought back Harrison Barnes, Trey Lyles, and Alex Len. The San Antonio Spurs brought back Trey Jones. They were able to re-sign Trey Jones and Julian Champagnie as well. They were able to re-sign the Oklahoma City Thunder as well. Were able to the Oklahoma City Thunder too as well. Were able to bring in a bunch of guys. The Toronto Raptors brought in Dennis Schroeder. Utah Jazz were able to extend Jordan Clarkson, and the Wizards, who will be going over in a few, were able to extend Kyle Kuzma. So a bunch of re-signs. There was a lot of extensions to go around. That was kind of the big story of it. But who were the biggest winners this offseason? So far, 1 week into free agency, there's a few teams. I got 4 teams who I think kind of were the big winners throughout the first week of free agency. The first one being the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think the Thunder got a lot better, and they're a legitimate playoff team in the Western Conference now. They brought in Cason Wallace, who is the point guard from Kentucky with their lottery pick, and also Keontae Johnson, who is a wing from Kansas State. They acquired 3 veterans in trades as well, with Victor Oladipo, Davis Bertans, and Patty Mills all set to come in. Oladipo used to play for the Thunder a few years ago, but he'll be headed back to OKC. Bertans has kind of got passed around. He signed that really bad contract with the Washington Wizards, and the Wizards were able to send him off to Dallas. Now Dallas is sending him to OKC. And Patty Mills, too, who re-signed on a 2-year deal with Brooklyn last offseason. They also were able to acquire him in a trade. And they signed a couple of interesting guys. Vasilij Micic, who is one of the European players who's coming over. There's 2 European guys that were signed to new contracts, and one of them being the EuroLeague MVP, signed with the Sacramento Kings. But Micic was a solid player in the EuroLeague. He signed a 3-year, $23.5 million deal with OKC. They also brought in Jack White, too, who was a rookie 2-way contract guy with the Milwaukee Bucks this past season. And now they got a very, very good young core. And as many people are forgetting, too, Chet Holmgren is set to make his debut and be a rookie this year after missing all of last year after tearing his ACL. But they got a core of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's now a superstar, Josh Giddey, Chet Holmgren, Lou Dort, Trey Mann, Jalen Williams, Kenrick Williams, The bigger Jalen Williams too. They have two Jalen Williams on their team and three Williamses on the team altogether. So very, 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 very interesting. Going to be very interesting in the clubhouse and the rest throughout the franchise too. And Alexej Pogashevsky too as well, and Aaron Wiggins. So they got a bunch of young players. Add Casey Wallace to the mix. He probably starts coming off the bench because of Giddey and Gilgeous-Alexander, and Holmgren probably becomes a starter too. You also have Oladipo, who will be in the mix. I think that they got a pretty solid team, and these guys are all developing into pretty solid players. I like what they've done so far. They haven't done a ton. They've only signed two guys, and neither of them were big signings, but Casey Wallace was a really good pick. I think he's going to be a very solid point guard in the NBA. And acquiring those three veterans too in trades, Oladipo, Bertans, and Mills, I think will help the young core out a decent amount, especially if they make a run to the playoffs. The second team being the Los Angeles Lakers. I think the Lakers improved very solidly throughout this offseason. They had a ton of free agents, and they spent their money wisely, to be honest with you. And they also got two really good draft picks. They got Jalen Hood-Schifino, who they were able to get in the mid-first round, and then Maxwell Lewis, who they were able to get in the late first round. Both guys who have solid NBA upside. Hood-Schifino is a tall point guard who's a good ball handler, good facilitator, which the Lakers really need. They don't really have a pure point guard on their roster right now. And Maxwell Lewis is also a good piece too. He's a good scorer, and might take him some time to become an impact player in the NBA, but at the very least, he's going to be a solid role player as well. And then, of course, they had the three big free agents that were available this offseason, two of them being restricted, Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura, and then D'Angelo Russell. People were wondering if they would bring one of those three guys back, if they bring two of those three guys back, or if they let them all go. They ended up bringing all three of them back. Austin Reeves re-signed on a 4-year, $56 million deal. Rui Hachimura signed a 3-year, $51 million deal. And D'Angelo Russell, they got for a nice bargain, too, for 2 years, $37 million. It's hard to imagine. I mean, he's had a lot of injury issues and he kind of had a down year, but it's tough to imagine that, he didn't get really anything higher than 2 years, 37, but he ended up settling for that with the Lakers. They also were able to bring in a few good depth pieces for a few good young players. Gabe Vincent, who was kind of the talk of the playoffs, was a two-way contract guy who made a name for himself in Miami Heat. They got him for 3 years and 33 mil. He's got a legit chance at being their starting point guard, honestly. Jackson Hayes, too. They got 2 years for the minimum. Who's a backup center for the Pelicans. Cam Reddish, who's been jumping around from team to team, has a ton of potential, but hasn't been able to put it together. And Taurean Prince, too, who's a good veteran. They got a 1 year, 4.5. Those are all solid pieces that are really going to fill out their bench. But they did lose some guys. I mean, they lost Dennis Schroeder, who had a great season for them this year. He signed with Toronto. Troy Brown Jr., Thomas Bryant, Malik Beasley, Lonnie Walker, and Mo Bamba all left, signed elsewhere, but the team wasn't great this year, and they completely retooled with some new guys, and obviously still have LeBron and AD, and I think they did a pretty good job of putting the team together. And then the third team, I think, who's had a great offseason is the Houston Rockets. Not only did they get two really good draft picks in Amen Thompson with the 4th pick and Cam Whitmore with the 20th pick, who should have been a lottery pick, probably should have been a top 10 pick, but a couple of injury issues made him slip on draft night. They ended up getting him at 20, which could be a huge steal. And they were able to bring in a few solid veterans too. They brought in Dylan Brooks to a 4-year, $80 million deal, and Fred VanVleet for 3 years, $130 million. Huge overpay for Fred VanVleet. I mean, $43 million a year is a huge overpay, but he's a really good player. He definitely is a really good player, and he'll capitalize being with the Rockets too and stepping in to be their star, I think. And Dylan Brooks too will give them a little bit of that edge. He's a little bit of a head case, but good defensive player. They also brought in Jock Landale, who came onto this team for the Suns this past year as a nice veteran off the bench, 4 years, $32 million. And now they got a plethora of guards. They got Fred VanVleet. They got Amen Thompson, who was the 4th pick. They have Cam Whitmore. And then returning, they have Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Josh Christopher, and Deshaun Nix. So there's a ton of guards on their roster as well. And they've only lost a couple of guys too. They lost KJ Martin, who they traded to the Clippers, and Usman Garuba and Ty Washington, who are both rookies that didn't really even get much playing time. So I think the Rockets did a pretty good job of retooling. And then the final team that I think was a winner this offseason was the Phoenix Suns. The Suns, obviously, they traded for Bradley Beal. That was the big talk of the town, but they went to work early and they addressed almost their entire bench were free agents, and especially after trading Bradley Beal too, they lost a lot of guys. So they really only had a handful of guys on their roster on June 30th when free agency opened, but they went straight to work once free agency started. They signed Yuta Watanabe, who's a good shooter off the bench, Josh Okogie, who's for both of them being for 1 year and the minimum at 2.3 mil. Chimezi Mitu, they also brought in, who's a big man, 1 year, 2.5. They brought in Keita Bates-Diop, Andrew Eubanks, who are 2 veteran big men at 2 years, $5 million. They re-signed Damian Lee to 2 years, 5.4, and they brought in a good veteran, great shooter to come off the bench in Eric Gordon at 2 years, 6.6 mil. So they went to work right away. They signed Okogie, Bates-Diop, Eubanks, Lee, and Watanabe really, really early, within like the first day or two. They signed all those guys, and that's going to be their bench. They're filling out their bench really, really well. And obviously, they lost Chris Paul, they lost Shamet, Landale, and Craig, but their lineup heading into the season will look like probably be Cameron Payne starting at the point, Devin Booker starting at shooting guard, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and DeAndre Ayton being their starting 5. And then off the bench, they have Watanabe, Okogie, Bates-Diop, Eubanks, Lee, Eric Gordon, Chimezi Mitu, and Ish Wainwright. They also re-signed. So those are 8 pieces too that are very solid. They still have 2 pieces left under contract to sign to their actual team. Actually, only one they have, because Tumani Kamara was drafted in the 2nd round. So they still have 1 spot left on their bench. But from a team that literally had about 4 or 5 guys under contract heading into free agency, they really filled out their team nicely on a bunch of minimum deals that won't hurt them in their salary cap. So I really like what the Suns did. Similar to what the Lakers did, but to kind of a higher degree, in my opinion. They got even better high caliber players, and that's what you need. You need to have a good bench in the NBA because you never know who's going to go down. Bradley Beal was a huge addition, but he's had injury issues his entire career. You never know when he's going to go down. Kevin Durant has had injury issues over the last couple of years. You never know how much. He's not going to play a full season. He may play half a season, if you're lucky. So I think that those were very good moves to try to keep the Suns in it, and they're going to be one of the favorites to win the NBA championship. There's no doubt about that. And before we wrap up the show, that's pretty much all for the free agency that went down. There was a lot of stuff that went down. That was the best way to recap it. The 4 teams that I thought won the offseason. One team we didn't talk about, though, is the Washington Wizards and their new look. The Wizards have a brand new look roster and are looking to be an exciting team next year. I mean, they're in a rebuild, but they re-signed Kyle Kuzma and were able to bring in a bunch of good players in exchange for Bradley Beal and Kristaps Porzingis and all those guys that they traded, on top of their young core as well. Their lineup from this past season is going to be completely different from their lineup heading into next year. Their lineup heading into last season is Monte Morris, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis, and Daniel Gafford. Those 5 guys were their starting 5 this past year. A lot of them had injury issues, so they didn't always start. And now you do a complete 180 to their projected lineup this season. Will be Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole in the backcourt, Corey Kispert and Denny Avdija, who are 2 of their good young players, good forwards, probably start together, and Daniel Gafford will come back to the team and will be the starting center. And then you got the bench too. And they still have DeLon Wright under contract. They have Johnny Davis, who was a rookie this past year, did not do much throughout the season, but will probably have a much bigger role. Bilal Coulibaly, who was their lottery pick this year. They think he's a little bit of a project, but could be good in the future. Landry Shamet, who was also part of the Chris Paul trade. Johnny Davis, as well as Anthony Gill and Ryan Rollins, who was a very solid, very solid rookie for the Warriors. Just did not see much time this past year. And then Tristan Vukcevic, who was their second round pick this past year. And then they got a couple of veterans too, Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala, who both have a year left in their contracts, and will be under contract for the Wizards if they're not cut. It'll be interesting to see if they hold on to those guys too. Both Gallinari and Muscala could be two veterans that the Wizards decide to hold on to, see if they can make an impact. But that's what the team looks like, and it's a brand new team. They're, after trading Bradley Beal and Porzingis, a lot of people thought they were going to be deep in a rebuild. They also were able to bring back Kyle Kuzma, so you throw Kyle Kuzma into the starting five, and either Kispert and Avdija will start alongside him. Very, very interesting team. Very interesting team. I still think that they can be somewhat competitive. I'm not saying that they're going to win the East, but being a play-in team is definitely in the mix and can be a high likelihood for the Wizards. So that's the best that I can do. Recapping everything that's gone down in free agency. It's been crazy so far. So many trades have been made. So many different teams going in different directions. But that's going to do it for this episode of the 3&D. Want to thank everyone for tuning into the Empty the Bench podcast network for another episode. Once again, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and follow the socials at the 3&D ETB. We'll be putting out content all week from this episode too. If you weren't able to watch the entirety of the episode, you'll be able to catch the highlights on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter. We'll be putting out content all week, just like you said. And hope everyone has a great night. And make sure to like and subscribe to Empty the Bench on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have a good night, everyone.